Hello and welcome back to Medical Compliance with Clarissa. I'm Clarissa Benfield, our Global Director and Business Line Leader for our medical, laboratory, and life safety and security businesses. And today I am so excited to be joined again by Wayne Stewart and Nico Schmidt for part 2 of our medical AI discussion. So in case people missed part 1, definitely go back and check it out, but I'll have you guys give a quick intro to yourself. There were so many good questions and so many things we wanted to cover. We figured we should do a part 2. So Wayne, if you want to give a brief intro, we'll start with you and then over to Nico.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Wayne Stewart. I am the Vice President Global for IoT and AI with Intertek, looking after primarily IoT-based cybersecurity as well as AI services. So as always, great to be back.
Yes, thank you. Nico?
Hi, Nico Schmidt, my name. Thanks for having me. I just joined 2 months ago at Intertek as an expert for AI quality assurance. I have some background in AI testing already across various industries, but my major part of my professional career spent in autonomous driving AI development.
Wonderful. So we talked a little bit about this on our episode 1, last part of the podcast, about the testing frameworks that are being used in AI and how these are being used to ensure not only safety, but also accuracy and reproducibility. So maybe we can talk just a little bit about that to kick us off in the way that people are using these testing frameworks. So maybe Nico, we'll start with you, and then Wayne, if you have anything to add as well.
Yeah, sure. So when it comes to testing frameworks, really, I think there's not specifically to medical, but also general AI. There are several frameworks out there by, for example, standardization institutes like NIST AI Risk Management Framework is one of the well-known ones. But several academic institutions are also working on them. From Germany, I know Fraunhofer a lot. That's a big one. But Oxford, CAP AI, there is more ethical touched. So there are several frameworks, and they largely follow the same mechanisms. Like you have to define your application scope, right, of your AI system, and then go about assessing risks in a rather structured way. So think about different trustworthiness dimensions like representativeness of the data that you use for training, robustness and disturbances that can happen, or bias and fairness, safety and security and privacy and all that. And then you when you did assess those risks specifically for your AI system, you go into designing the specific tests basically to address those risks. And then you use common machine learning approaches like statistical testing, reproducibility, robustness testing with perturbations or quality variations, domain shifts, and so on. And so this means next to testing, usually you also put some quality criteria on top, like what I said, risk management or human oversight, continuous monitoring, and so on. And all this is actually all well embedded in the EU AI Act requirements as well, the high risk requirements at least, where most medical devices fall under. And yeah, at Intertek, we actually worked out services around the EU AI Act in this setting. And when it comes to specifically medical, I think there we have more specific and additional frameworks. The few I know of are from FDA, for example, good machine learning practices or total product life cycle, where they include some more specifics to medical, like clinically relevant conditions are required, or simulated clinical environments to observe the usage also of those systems before releasing this and so on.
Yeah, I think it's great to mention, of course, the EU AI Act that we've been following quite a bit, right? As well as everything that's being released by the FDA, right? The different guidances. So really important for people if they're thinking about getting into this space with their med devices to be following these things, right? And making sure they're keeping up to date with what the requirements are. I don't know, Wayne, from your side, if there's anything that Nico missed that you think that you would add in terms of, the testing frameworks that we're seeing or things that we're seeing from a reproducibility standpoint or accuracy standpoint?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that Nico missed. I would just sort of add maybe a little bit of context on this, and is that we're still really at early days here. So a lot of these standards, these frameworks, are still under development, and so it's I think an exciting time, a really interesting time, and that adds a layer of challenge for everybody to keep up with the state of the art. But the environment is moving quickly. And what I think is happening, and we'll see continue to happen, is that these general frameworks emerge and they become sort of industry standards, and then eventually they become tailored to the medical space. And we'll see that kind of as we move forward. But in the end of the day, it's sort of our duty to follow the state of the art and what's available today, and just make sure that we're keeping up with the developments.
Yeah, I think it's so important to talk about state of the art. We talk about it all of the time with medical devices in a lot of different ways, right? With standards and with requirements, right? Being to that state of the art, what is the latest and greatest, showing that you're doing your due diligence, showing that you're following these frameworks, because, we are talking about potentially like life critical, safety critical products, right? So with that, one of the things that comes up a lot, and maybe we'll start with you, Wayne, on this one, is post-market performance, right? So post-market performance in a lot of ways for medical devices. We see a lot of focus on this from the MDR. We see a lot of focus on this within the new versions of the standard, right? This idea of, okay, it's not just so much, here's my device and now it's out on the market and I'm done, right? What are people doing, right, in monitoring their devices post-market for things like AI, right? How do you monitor it once you've now put it out into the universe and it's being used in a practical setting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what companies are doing is really they're building performance monitoring tools into their products or into their processes at the end of the day, so that they have the ability to sort of have sometimes even real-time monitoring of what their products are doing. And from an AI perspective, what this means is it's monitoring for drift, or any kind of deviation or shift in the outcome of the AI component of the model. So this can be done really by having sort of that real-time monitoring of the outcomes of the medical device, or it could be done even through a feedback loop from the clinician, from the doctor. So we have oftentimes a human in the loop, and they're able to sort of provide input on sort of the acceptability of the outcome, whether or not they agree with that, and so you can track sort of the deviations from what is being reported by the A model. And any kind of shift in outcome or any kind of degradation in performance would then trigger a need to potentially retrain the model, or at least investigate what's going on, or fall back to sort of a previous known state for the model.
Yeah, Nico, any thoughts to add there from your side?
No, Wayne pretty much covered everything. I totally agree to this.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned something that, of course, is really interesting when we talk about this idea of having to retrain models, right? And, of course, as you mentioned, right, there's always going to be, at this point, right, some sort of human element involved, someone who could identify a doctor or professional who would say, hey, this is not looking right now. We need to go back and maybe do something different. So when we think about retraining, right, once a device is already on the market, how does that work in practice, right? What does that look like? How do you handle, actually needing to retrain an AI model again once this device is already out there and being used?
Yeah, I think manufacturers need to treat this retraining almost as a new software release cycle. So, like any kind of model changes, any kind of retraining that was done with the model, adjusting parameters or thresholds. There needs to be some sort of impact assessment to understand the scope and the impact of those changes, and then depending on the outcome of that assessment, then you're sort of measuring the risk of that, and establishing just how far you need to go to release the product. And that could be full regression testing of the model and running a full suite of testing, and it could be as far as a new regulatory submission.
Mm-hmm.
Manufacturers when they develop their models, they need processes for change controls. It's not all that different from traditional software or secure software procedures. You introduce a new functionality from a cybersecurity perspective. You need to assess the impact of that. You change the behavior of the model. That needs to be, I'll say, at least assessed. And undergo testing. And so, those traditional software development procedures need to be adapted to keep, these changes in the AI system in mind, right? And, from what we've seen from the industry, regulators are working closely with the industry to find innovative approaches to keep up with AI, because there's this potential for a lot of churn, a lot of change, and that needs to be managed to not impact innovation, but also to make sure that we're keeping patients safe and getting the quality results that we really need. So, there are different approaches that regulators are taking, and it could be pre-approval for certain types of model retraining, or really just working collaboratively with the manufacturers to find good solutions.
Yeah, and I think you point out something that's so critical, right? Like the medical industry is used to this when we're seeing secure software and software updates, right? I mean, this has happened for a long time with some of these complex devices, and really taking that same approach, knowing that, you may be doing upgrades once a product is already out there, or you may have to go back, as you're saying, and do some of this retraining and, putting those processes and procedures into place as part of your overall process. So I think that's so critical. With that too, I know you both touched on this a little bit and mentioned this idea of adaptive AI. So I'm wondering, Nico, if you could talk a little bit about that and what we mean when we say adaptive AI, and then what challenges kind of are presented with things that are adaptive, and how do you address that from a regulatory and a practical standpoint?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it touches a lot of on what Wayne just said, right? On the retraining aspect. When do you have to retrain? Adaptive AI means that the parameters change on the device continuously and adapt to the specific use case, which of course poses some risks, because you want to make sure that it stays within some bounds to not go crazy. And but it can also have a lot of opportunities, right, to devices where it's really critical to be personalized to the patient that the device is for. So I think there are those two coin sides. So on the one hand, I always say, okay, whenever you have trained and properly tested an AI system, don't let it run continuously change and continuously learn new things. Otherwise, I would rather suggest to go the full software engineering release process to run all the tests again. But then you, as Wayne said, might also need to have the full approval process on top. So from regulator's side of view, I think there is, for example, a proposed adaptive framework from the FDA, where they have this predetermined control change plan, making suggestions of how to create a framework with boundaries around that problem, where you still need mechanisms to include mechanisms like specifying what can change and how the system deals with it, and the company, the provider, deals with that, and also have some mechanisms like monitoring in place, drift detection, also processes for proper rollback mechanisms in case something is odd, and maybe human in the loop mechanisms to have not the full testing plan, but at least some humans look over and release update whether it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like I say this a lot on the podcast for a variety of different topics, but always encouraging people, right, with the FDA and other regulators to follow them, the guidance documents that they release, the webinars that they do, right? They try to be, we've seen a lot of shift from the regulators trying to be more forthcoming and working with industry, especially in these areas with new types of technologies or things that they don't know as much about or different. And so I always recommend, right, we see these frameworks coming from the FDA, we see guidance documents, they've done a few sessions, public sessions, webinars. So always want to make sure that people are saving that information, following along, because I think there's a lot that can be learned from exactly what the regulators are expecting to see. So with that too, another thing that comes up and people, talk a lot about, or we hear a lot about, is this idea of transparency with AI, explainability with AI, and the outputs that are coming, right? And what that means for not only the clinicians and the people who are using that information, but also for the regulators. So what do we see, or have we seen manufacturers doing to ensure this idea of transparency when you're using an AI output as part of, an overall healthcare plan? So maybe we'll start with you, Nico, on that one. And then Wayne, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So if it comes to transparency and especially explainability, there are several layers that you just touched on them. So first of all, try always to kind of use explainable and interpretable models, right? That's the kind of, we had that in the last session. Wayne was explaining on this one. For example, decision trees where you have more control. But if you really rely on the more powerful state-of-the-art AI models like neural networks, large neural networks, which are mostly like black boxes to us, you have to do some tricks, right? And one level is to have the explainability for the tool developers, right? Or AI developers, so they know that their models are kind of picking up on the right cues in the data and looking for the right things. And there are tools like, or methods like SHAP or LIME, saliency maps. Those are things that are commonly used for that. But those can also be used for the users. And device manufacturers need to implement proper interfaces which visualize to the users those indicators, right? So where's the cue coming from in an image, for example, in an X-ray image, for example, or something like this, or visualize uncertainties, confidences of the outputs of the classification results of the models, so that the clinicians have ways to interpret them better. So I think this is very important. And from you touch on the regulator side, so usually it's required to hand in a lot of documentation prior to approval with, I don't know, information about model architecture or feature analysis, feature important analysis, and validation reports, of course. But also things like human factor studies to show studies on how do those clinicians work with these devices and how do they interpret, do they understand those cues that are shown to them, right? So all of this is important, along with, of course, some monitoring and mechanisms to provide feedback by the users and then put this into the development life cycle.
Yeah, I think it's so critical that you mentioned that too. And, we've had a lot of discussions at industry events just related to not only how clinicians and doctors are using this technology, but also if patients are expected to in some type of home healthcare setting or, taking their products with them, as they live their day-to-day life, right? We can have all the amazing technology advancements that we want, but if doctors, nurses, clinicians, the people using the technology don't know how to use it in the right way, or it's not helpful for them, they're not going to use it, right? The same as with if it's overly complicated, patients aren't going to use it, right? So, when they're thinking about integrating these really amazing things and, how AI can be used as a tool, you also, at the end of the day, as you say, you have to think about the human factors. You have to think about the patients. You have to think about the people who are using the device. You can have as great of technology as you want, but if people aren't using it, you're not going to get the outcomes that you need. Yeah. So Wayne, as our resident cybersecurity expert too, right? We can't really talk about AI and AI-based products without also talking a little bit about cybersecurity, right? So when we think about AI-based, diagnostics, things like that, different types of AI products that people are using, cloud-connected systems, right? So we have a lot of concern, again, not only over patient data, patient information, but also over just general cybersecurity concerns. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how the two things are interconnected and kind of go hand in hand when we think cybersecurity and AI together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I don't think AI doesn't really change the fundamentals of cybersecurity. Good cybersecurity hygiene and processes still starts with understanding the risks and being able to design for security, and it usually means using things like zero trust defense in depth strategies, implementing strong encryption, authentication, making sure there's appropriate patching mechanisms and secure ways to distribute those patches and safely to deploy them. So all of that, I think, is still fundamental. I think there's also an analogy between cybersecurity and AI. They're both, I'd say, emerging topics within the medical device space, although cybersecurity has been around and more developed as a concept, but it's still a similar process, and they're both about managing risk. So, AI introduces new threats. You have adversarial attacks that could be conducted against the AI system. You have in that case, it's maybe an attacker is trying to manipulate the inputs of the AI for some desired, maybe nefarious outcome. And you also have AI systems that have infrastructure that could be vulnerable to attacks. That could be the cloud-based system that's running the AI models, or it could be the AI models themselves, or it could even be the development environment that is used to produce the models, to train the models. So you got to think of the whole supply chain sort of the AI system and where vulnerabilities and risks could be introduced. But at the end of the day, I think from a connected device perspective, secure by design principles are still fundamental. And I think these are well understood, and there's standards out there like IEC 81001-5-1 that really are a baseline for implementing cybersecurity for medical software throughout the software development lifecycle, throughout the software development process. And so it bakes this in. And so AI just introduces, I'd say, a new risk vector, a new threat vector that needs to be considered as part of that sort of existing process.
And I have to ask Wayne too, because people ask this question all the time, right? Like, who is responsible, right? So if I'm just providing some sort of AI or cloud-based type of element, and it's on a hospital network, or it's working with a piece of hardware, capital equipment, right? Who is responsible then if there is a sort of nefarious attack or a cybersecurity issue, right? People always want to know, like, where does my responsibility lie if I'm just supplying this portion that's connected to this network or that is used with any device, right? So people ask that question all the time. So just curious if you have thoughts on that from a due diligence standpoint and a responsibility standpoint when someone is, involved in some part of that overall structure.
Yeah, I think everybody bears some responsibility, but at the end of the day, the bottom line is the manufacturer is responsible for maintaining the security of the system that they're providing. So that means if there are operating systems that are embedded into it, or third-party components that are embedded into the products that they're providing, they're responsible for maintaining the security, not just of the product and the software that they've developed, but also everything that's bundled into what they're providing to their end customer. So they are responsible for making sure that those patches are available and distributed, whether it's for their software or the components of the products that they used that are being used. And that's where I would say like a software bill of materials is still a relatively new concept to many product manufacturers, but it's so critical because a software bill of materials defines or identifies all of those third-party components, and it allows manufacturers to much more easily track known vulnerabilities that are related to the components within their product, and allows them to manage that risk and identify the need to patch in a more consistent and proactive manner.
Such a good point. So we talked a little bit about, the EU AI Act, the FDA's guidances that they've put out, NIST framework, right? State of the art. So there's a lot of kind of information out there that people can be looking to, that they can be following along. So, I mean, how do we recommend to people that they're preparing to meet these guidelines, the international guidelines or the FDA guidelines? Am I looking at everything and make sure I'm meeting all of the requirements? Do I start with one and it kind of maps to other requirements, right? If I'm trying to put this into a practical strategy saying, I'm going to be taking this product, globally or as globally as I can, where do I even start with some of these regulatory kind of frameworks that are existing right now?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to take something global, I'd say you look for where the bar is the highest and start there. And really, in today's world, that's probably the EU AI Act. It's from a regulatory perspective, I think it's the most robust, most influential regulation for AI systems that it's not specific to medical devices, but it applies to medical devices. So starting there, because there are really clear definitions of requirements. I say really clear. There's still standards.
Clear as can be.
Yeah. Exactly, but it's starting there, and then you can look into the guidelines from the regulators as well, right? So the FDA has some great guidelines on AI and medical devices, but from a practical standpoint, I'd start looking at high-risk AI system requirements in the EU AI Act and making sure that you're addressing those, because those are going to be foundational, I think, going forward to global market access for any kind of medical device that's implementing an AI capability. But the goal really is still going to be, to try to be agile as these standards, as these regulations are in development. So it's integrating processes that ensure that you're going to be compliant for today's requirements as well as for the future requirements. And again, I always come back to cybersecurity as the analogy, but it's secure by design, and from an AI perspective, I think you have to be sort of safe by design, but you also have to be trustworthy by design, transparent by design, and you've got to really plug it into your process, and it becomes a lifecycle management consideration.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Nico, you've been in the industry for a long time. You've been doing this from a practical standpoint, right, as well. So you agree with Wayne's approach, right? Really looking, obviously we have the EU AI Act and it's pretty far advanced compared to some of the others. Is that the same approach you would recommend to take?
Yeah, definitely. I think I fully agree that EU AI high risk requirements are the so far highest bar. And it totally makes sense to look at this. Also, they have to.
Yes.
But I mean, these are also that's evolved over time, right? I mean, looking at best practices, I think the manufacturers of medical devices and are among the players that are long involved in research and pushing research of reliable AI, safe AI. So they know pretty much the game and develop this together with regulators. So I think this is pretty much the full spectrum of what we already discussed, or full spectrum of safeguards. So human oversight, bias detection, privacy respecting practices, transparency, explainability, and testing, robustness testing. along with some risk management and lifecycle framework around that. So I think plus in medical is specifically the stakeholder and user inclusion, right?
I think you make such good points, right, about the medical industry in general. Of course, it's very risk-based. Of course, there's some conservativeness and some apprehension sometimes with some of these things, right? They very much want to make sure that these products are safe, that they're doing things that are in an ethical way, that it's going to benefit patients. And so I think, we see the medical industry when as you mentioned, Wayne, like the EU AI Act is not just for medical, but as we have medical device manufacturers, they can tend to be a lot further along because their mind is already set around how do we identify risk? How do we mitigate risk? How do we make products that are safe and effective, right? That's just the natural thought process of the medical device manufacturers. And now you're just adding on this kind of next layer with a new type of exciting technology that they will be as cautious about as they would be with any type of technology that's getting introduced. Yeah. All right, before we end up here, right, the other question, of course, that people always ask, right, we have a lot of manufacturers who are either new to this space or who are trying to integrate AI or have exciting ideas. So are there ways that we as a third party are helping manufacturers with products that have, AI integrated into their medical devices, or if they're just thinking about, hey, we want to use AI in this way, but we don't know how to go from ABC to XYZ, right? Are there ways that we can help?
Yeah, absolutely. And from Intertek perspective, and we offer full spectrum of services, starting with consulting at the front end, with how to implement all of these processes that we've talked about, all of these controls that we've talked about, to make sure that you have a safe AI system that meets the performance expectations that you're trying to achieve. Making sure that you have a clear roadmap for compliance, for regulatory compliance. Certainly offer training for and if you're not familiar with the EU AI Act, we can provide support on there. And we've built using that EU AI Act as a benchmark. We've built an entire framework for assessing AI systems, looking at it from it's a modular approach. So different organizations are ready to sort of jump in at different points, and so we've got modules that focus on governance, modules that focus on security, modules that focus on transparency, as well as on safety. So there's different ways to look at it, and there's different entry points. But the point, at the end of the day, these are all areas that need to be covered. So that's how we've adapted our services in the framework that we're following with customers today.
Yeah, and of course, I think as you talked about, right, it's new, but it's not, right? AI has been around for a while, but we're seeing it just rapidly progress. And I think from a third-party side, from an Intertek side, right, we're learning about the regulations and how to apply the regulations, and we're so interested to engage and work with manufacturers and see what they're doing, right? Just like a regulator would, we want to know what the industry is doing, what manufacturers are doing. It's super beneficial for us to have an idea of, what these technologies are being used for and how people are integrating them. So of course, we love to have any conversations with our manufacturers about AI, even if it's just to say, hey, we're thinking about it in the next 3 years, or this is what we're seeing, or this is where we're confused. We love to have those conversations. So before we end, I just want to open it up. If there's anything you think that we missed that people should know, any best practices or things that we want to throw out there before we close today. Nico, I'll leave it to you. Again, you've been in this space a long time. We covered a lot on our part 2 and part 1 of our AI discussion.
I think we covered pretty much everything that's out there, the full spectrum of best practices you can have. Come to us, do external testing. It's the best liability shield. And second independent opinion is always best, right? And in medical, you have to do it anyways for many devices. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are definitely here to help. Wayne, anything that you want to end with before we close?
Nothing, no topics that I think that we missed. Just to reemphasize a point that you made, and always happy to talk with manufacturers and customers to talk about what they're experiencing, what their challenges are, and just overall how their AI development process is going. So. Always happy to engage and
yeah, and I think you make a good point too, right? We hear a lot back from manufacturers about what feedback they're getting from regulators, right? So if they're making a submission and hearing information back, right, we're always happy to engage in those conversations if there's additional support that's needed or findings that are being had. So you guys, I really appreciate you joining us for part 2 of this discussion. Again, if anyone has any questions, of course, you can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to set you up with any of our subject matter experts. Thank you guys so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.